Dear all, I'd like to wish you good afternoon and welcome you on the next LMS Center talk of fall semester 24. Before I introduce our today guest, I'd like to inform that you can follow the LMS program and its abstracts of lectures both via LMS Center website or via LMS Center Facebook profile or Facebook profile of Department of Philosophy and Social Sciences. If you don't like any of these options, you can also follow LMS on the department's Instagram. In addition, I would like to inform that this talk is recorded, so please, when you are asking some questions, activate your microphones in front of you by pressing the long button. And after the end of the questions, please turn it again off. Our today guest is Associate Professor Ladislav Koreň, who is a member of our department, and today he will talk about transformative theory of rationality, and maybe he will present some critical position according to this theory. So let's welcome on LMS, and now the stage is yours.
Thank you, Andrzej. Basically, I will provide a critique of the transformative theory of rationality. So my talk is really going to focus and critically reflect on a recent elaboration of the venerable view of humans as rational animals. So Mathew Boyle, in particular, following John McDowell, has recently offered a critique of a family of theories according to which rational animals, just like other animals, possess some basic non-rational mental powers for perception or desire, plus some higher rational mental powers which are superimposed on and supervising those basic animal mental powers. Boyle calls this family of theories additive theories of rationality. The sign plus is supposed to signify that there is some kind of addition of higher mental powers to some basic mental powers. And Boyle contrasts those additive theories of rationality with a very different approach or account of rationality. According to this different approach, rational animals have really different kinds of minds because all their basic mental powers, including perception, desire, or belief, are somehow informed and really transformed by rationality, as he understands it. And Boyle calls this kind of theory, which he favors, a transformative theory of rationality. And Boyle, basically, his dialectic is that he basically argues that additive theories face some serious problems, which transformative theories do not face or can easily solve. And this is supposed to demonstrate that transformative theory is a better theory of rationality than additive theories. So my motivation and objective in this talk and the paper which I'm going to finish this year is that Boyle's paper has been highly influential in the field, and very cited paper. Basically, I don't know, it has 260 citation in Google Scholar. But to my surprise, I realized that his main arguments, and he basically offers just two arguments or objections to additive theories, have been rarely scrutinized by people who either reject or accept them. So it seems like the field is divided. Either people think that it's okay, it's fine, it's super, or they think that it's not fine, super, but nobody really addressed those arguments. So I'm going to address his arguments, and I will try to show that after closer scrutiny, they turn out to be less than satisfying or convincing. So I will argue that basically additive theories of sorts have resources to answer his objections or to meet his arguments, and also that his arguments do not provide reasons to accept any thesis as radical as Boyle's transformative theory of rationality. So this is what I'm going to argue or to show. So why bother about this issue about, the rationality, about its nature, and so on? So because we humans are traditionally distinguished as rational animals, starting with Aristotle, the implication often being that rationality marks a profound difference between us and other non-rational animals, something like anthropological difference. So this is kind of, to debate this issue is a kind of engaging in the venerable project of human self-understanding, given that humans tend to understand themselves, at least some of humans tend to understand themselves, specifically philosophers, as rational animals. But there are challenges to this view or to this project. You may ask, what about apparent human irrationality? There is a huge literature, empirical one, on human biases and irrationalities and so on. There is also an evidence of intelligence, including responsiveness to some kind of evidence in other animals. And of course, there is the issue of evolutionary continuity, whereas the idea that there is some clear, sharp separation between human animals and non-human animals seems to, contradict this evolutionary continuity. So there are some issues. So the plausibility and interest of the claims 1 and 2, the claim that we are rational animals and that rationality is supposed to mark some profound difference, critically depends on what rationality is supposed to mean or to be and what difference it is supposed to make. So some conceptual work must be done to motivate this project and also to meet those challenges. So Boyle aims basically to offer such a clarification. I think that this is a perfectly legitimate and interesting project and agenda. So I'm on the same page with him in this respect, though I would disagree about the details or about his particular conceptions. Okay, so that's the motivation of the debate. So I said that we must be clear about what rationality is supposed to be and what difference it is supposed to make. So there are various notions or accounts of rationality. Not all of them would be interesting for this project. Rationality, which is supposed to make a big difference, or the notion of rationality, which is supposed to make a big difference, is roughly the following. I follow here basically Boyle, but many other philosophers would agree with something like this account of rationality. So rational animals are supposed to assess and manage their beliefs, desires, choices, or actions by prior or posterior reflection on what speaks for, against, or against them, including reasons afforded by perceptual experience, other beliefs, or values. And this in turn seems to involve or require some kind of capacities. So specifically, some conceptual capacities are required, which are likely language dependent, the capacities to articulate judgments and reasons, to be able to ask and answer questions concerning judgments and their rational basis, and also some kind of reflective, deliberative capacities required to assess what is the right thing to believe, desire, or do in light of the available evidence or reasons, and to adjust beliefs, desires, or choices accordingly. So this is kind of broad or general account of rationality, which underlies these debates. So the people in this debate tend to focus on this notion of rationality, though there are other notions of rationality, such as ecological, evolutionary, I don't know what, but this one seems to be involved really in these debates. But this is just the beginning. So we just somehow define what we are talking to discuss in broad outlines. So let us suppose that, let us agree or grant that rationality in roughly this sense is what distinguishes rational animals from non-rational animals. So rational animals must have such capacity, whereas non-rational animals won't have such capacity. And let us also assume that this distinction between rational and non-rational animals coincides with the man-animal distinction, which is not that clear, but usually people tend to assume also the second point. Okay, so there is this kind of distinction, and it coincides with the distinction between man-animal distinction. It follows that the only rational animals are humans, if we accept these 2 points. So, but this doesn't yet imply any commitment to different kinds of minds, which is something which Boyle would like to substantiate in any interesting sense, and Boyle is aware of that. So to drive this point home, Boyle contrasts basically those additive with transformative theories. So I will now try to explain what he means by this in more detail. So let's unpack this a bit. So additive theories of rationality according to Boyle. So according to Boyle, additive rationality is distinguished between something like basis and something like superstructure. Basis is supposed to be present in all animals qua animals. So a basis consists of low-level mental powers, which are basically non-rational powers for perception-induced beliefs, or that's the technical term of Boyle. Just we can shortly say powers for perception and powers for desire, or what he calls desire-induced voluntary movements, and likely more such as memory, imagination, and so on. And then there is the superstructure, which is present only in higher rational animals, consisting of higher level mental powers, which are basically distinctive rational powers operating on inputs delivered by basic powers, which conceptualize them, draw inference from them, assess them, or correct them. So there's this basis, simple animal capacity for perception or desire or something like that. And there is the superstructure, some kind of higher level cognitive powers, which operate on the inputs delivered by basic animal powers in the way that they conceptualize them, draw inference from them, and so on and so on. And the important point, according to these additive theories of rationality, is that this shared animal basis or generic animal basis is unaffected by the superstructure. So, in other words, when we attribute such powers to us, humans, and to other animals, we basically mean the same kind of thing. It's the same kind of capacity or accomplishment in both humans and animals, because it's shared basis. There is no equivocation. We do not talk about perception in different semantic register than we do in animals than in humans. It's basically the same kind of thing. So, and then there is the second alternative theory, which is a very different one, and which Boyle favors and wants to substantiate. According to this theory, rationality is not an extra cognitive power added to basic and independent animal mental powers. On the contrary, its possession or development informs and really transforms such basic animal powers. So in rational, but not in non-rational animals, perception has really something like a rational form, because it is something like reason providing. And also desire has something like a rational form or character, because it is both reason providing and reason requiring. So when we talk of perception, belief, desire, or volitions in rational and non-rational animals, we really do not talk in the same sense or register, because they are different in kind. One has a rational form, the other doesn't have a rational form. Well, this is the kind of distinction which Boyle draws. And here is his way of schematizing this divide. So I'm not going to comment on it, but it's just, schematize what I just said, that according to one theory, there is this basis, animal basis, and further powers are added to that in the case of rational, but not in the case of non-rational animals. And on the other side are transformative theories, which assume some generic animal powers, but then they say that these two powers are realized in two very different ways in rational and non-rational animals, respectively. Okay, so the first one doesn't claim any difference in kinds of minds, because much of the minds are shared. Whereas the second implies some really interesting sense in which the kinds of minds are categorically different. Okay, so that's Boyle's way of characterizing these two views of rationality. And here are his two critiques. I will start with the so-called interaction problem. As I said, he basically has just two lines of arguments, which are supposed to somehow disqualify additive theories and to lend support to transformative theories indirectly. And the first one is the so-called interaction problem. So I will start with interaction problem. Okay, so maybe this is gonna to be a bit too abstract for maybe if there are students, bachelor students, but probably there are not. But this is a kind of philosophical, I would say, even transcendental argument, which was suggested by John McDowell, who is a source of inspiration for Boyle. And the argument goes like this. So the question is, how can our perceptions or sensory experience rationally constrain, justify, or explain our empirical judgments as they seem to do? So there is something, according to Boyle and McDowell, some datum to do justice to in a philosophical theory. The datum is supposed to be that our empirical judgments about the world are not just caused, but they are rationally constrained, justified, or warranted by what we perceive, by our sensory experience. Else there is the problem of so-called frictionless spinning in a void. If this is not the case, our judgments that do not answer, do not engage with experience and the world in the right way. Okay, so if there is no rational constraint imposed by sensory experience on our judgments, then it seems like spinning, like frictionless spinning in a void. And so if perception, the argument goes, if perception is really animal-like, also in humans, non-rational, so presumably non-conceptual, because conceptuality is supposed to be a mark of rationality, it seems that we can't do justice to this datum, because to assume that non-conceptual experiential episodes can impose any rational constraints on conceptual judgment is just what Sellars called meat of the given. Okay, so this is kind of abstract argument. So our rationality, if we are to do justice to this datum, must always already presuppose or be presupposed in our perception via actualization of conceptual capacities. In other words, our perception must have a conceptual articulation. So Boyle seems to argue like this. If this line of argument derived from McDowell is correct, it indicates strongly that additive theories just can't provide the right account of our mentality and the role of rationality in it. The problems arises only if we think of rationality as a separate power for processing non-rational, that is, non-conceptual perceptual inputs by way of assessing, endorsing, rejecting, or correcting them. If rationality, however, is already at work in them via the exercise of conceptual capacity, the problem simply doesn't arise. And this is precisely what transformative theory of rationality, but not additive theory of rationality, allow us to claim. So it's a kind of indirect support for transformative theories of rationality, because this problem arises or is supposed to arise only for additive conceptions of rationality. It doesn't arise for transformative conception of rationality, because those theories simply claim that conceptual capacities are always already involved in our perceptual experience and also in our desires and other capacities. So that's one argument. And there is the second argument or second critique of additive theories, which is supposed also to indirectly support transformative theories. And it's so-called the unity problem. This problem is not super clear, as I will argue shortly, but if I'm correct, it goes like this. So there is again some kind of datum to start with. It's that we normally self-attribute perceptions, desires, judgments to ourselves and to other persons. Okay? I might say, for instance, that I wanted to have some more beers yesterday, but I chose not to. And Boyle says that this kind of datum indicates that there is a single evolving subjective point of view. This is his term, not my term. I wouldn't be able even to elaborate this, but his notion, a single evolving subjective point of view of one subject, for instance, the view as to what to do, so not having beers, okay, so I decide eventually, even if I'm inclined to have them. And so there is no one rational I plus some non-rational I supposed to be controlled by the rational I. There's something like this kind of reasoning that, you know, we tend to have a single evolving subjective, maybe rationally evolving subjective point of view. There are no two I's, some lower level I and some higher level I, which is supposed to control. So this is supposed to be something going against additive theory, because if perception is a product of non-rational system that is separate from the rational judging system, how can they belong to a single point of view or to one point of view rather than to two different points of view, some lower level one and higher level one? Something which might be implied by very popular psychological theories that there is some kind of system one, system two. So it seems like Boyle is, you know, taking issue with such theories. But there is really nothing like this distinction. There is just kind of single evolving self-conscious point of view. And this is supposed to be a problem for additive theories because they seem to imply that there are basically 2 points of view, one rational and one non-rational. So, and this is supposed to be, again, indirect support for transformative theories, because if our perception really actualizes our self-conscious rationality, then unity, the single subjective point of view, may be preserved. Really, there is not much more in the argument. It's not very clear, but it seems to go like this. So if you don't get it right now, don't worry. We will return to that. Maybe somebody could clarify it better than I did, but basically it's something like this. It's a much shorter argument, by the way, than the much shorter critique than the critique based on the interaction problem. So here is my critique of Boyle's critique. So basically, given that he has 2 critiques, I will have 2 critiques of his 2 critiques. So add interaction problem, and I will focus just on perception. He focuses both on perception and desire, but this would be too long. So I just confine myself to the case of perception. So here is one strategy which one can use to block this critique of Boyle. Especially it's available, in my view, to proponents of additive theories. So it's possible, according to this defense strategy, it's possible to accept McDowell's datum. So to say, okay, I accept that perception warrants or justifies judgment, but deny that it can't be, this datum can't be accommodated within additive theories of sorts. This is possible to maintain this combination of view if one claims that perceptual content is not conceptual. There are such theories. That means it's not propositional or discursive. So perception might have a sort of content, but not a conceptual one because it's not propositional discursive content. But still one claims that perception has a content in the sense that it somehow represents something as being somehow, for instance, red. Maybe it's difficult for you to see why this is not supposed to be conceptual, but there are such positions in the literature. And there are many proponents of so-called non-conceptual perceptual contents who claim just that there is some S of perceptual content that is not really conceptual or propositional. So if this is possible, those people can both defend kind of additive theory of rationality via claiming this combination of theses, that perception does have content, but non-conceptual, but this content can still sort of justify or warrant or rationally constrain our empirical judgment. So the question is, if this is a position maintained in the literature, why is that not enough for warrant or justification of sorts? Why is not enough to, to satisfy or to do justice to McDowell's dating. But the situation is more complicated, actually, because McDowell is aware of that, and he maintains something more. So he says something like this. Sensory experience as of X being red must be conceptualized by us consciously, else we can't explain how we could appreciate what we perceive as our reason for judging that X is F. No? So it's something like, in order to appreciate the content of experience as a reason or as a constraint on our judgment, we have to conceptualize it. So the same conceptual capacity must be actualized in perception and judgment, according to McDowell. Okay? And Boyle puts it like this. For such a perception to constrain or warrant my judgment that X is red, it must speak in the same language that reflective or judging mind speaks or understands. That means in concepts that we could use also in our explicit reflective thinking or reasoning. Otherwise, we just can't explain how we could appreciate what experience affords us as a reason or as a constraint on what we are to judge. Something like this. In reply, however, I think that additive theories can say something like this, and probably they would say something like this. I'm not committing myself to any non-conceptual content, but I'm just, arguing on behalf of them. So we need to appreciate perceptions as reasons for perception to warrant or justify our judgments. Because warrant or justification may be of a less intellectualist, typically externalist kind. You are conversant with debates in epistemology. So in epistemology, there is a divide between internalist and externalist, and that's a possible move to make. So why shouldn't perception sort of justify judgments, even if I do not appreciate its content as such warrant? There might be some kind of, if the perception works reliably at the moment, it might justify my judgments, which is based on that. So it's possible to continue that conceptualization of experience may take place only upstream in some kind of central rational system, which is perfectly consistent with additive theories. The way, for instance, Boyle presents additive theories is he uses Gareth Evans or David Velleman, and he says that these guys just think that there is some kind of non-conceptual sensory experience, which is upstream conceptualized in some higher rational system, and so on. And based on that, some kind of judgment is judgment results. So this is possible to maintain. And it's possible to continue that once experience is so processed or conceptualized upstream, we get an input that speaks basically the same language as judgment because it's conceptualized. Okay, so we can also explain at a higher level a kind of internalist warrant or justification which requires appreciation. So it's basically this defense strategy is to say, in some way, there can be an externalist warrant, and this may arise even if perceptual experience is not conceptual, non-rational. Then upstream, the experience can be conceptualized in some higher level, and this allows also for some kind of internalist warrant or justification. So it seems to me that additive theories or theorists who are sympathetic to some kind of additive theory of rationality might argue like this. And I do not think that there are really any argument provided by Boyle or McDowell that really should convince those people who have this particular conception of how perception works and how perception is integrated with conceptual system and with judgment. So there is also, interestingly, another strategy how to block Boyle's objection. And this strategy I basically derived from Boyle himself. He has a later article in which he basically suggests this kind of strategy. So it's possible for additive theorists to deny McDowell's datum, which is supposed to be something like given, we have to do justice to it, and to claim something, no, perception doesn't warrant or rationally constrain judgment. Perception as such, per se. Boyle assumes that this is not what additive theorists are going to propose. But in my view, this combination of views in principle available to them. So it's possible for additive theorists to claim something like this. Perception may lack content, or what they call representational content altogether. Not even content such as this red X, which is maybe conceptual, maybe non-conceptual. Only when perception is conceptual upstream in the central system, in the conscious sensory experience, can it provide a reason or can be appreciated as providing such a reason. Let me explain what I mean by this. It might seem too abstract, but basically it seems to me that Boyle himself argues in this way. So in a later paper, Boyle says that perceptual experience doesn't really have any determinate content as of X being red or this red X. He says there are just too many such more or less determinate contents which perception merely affords. We can't really attribute to perception, to sensory experience as such, any such content. That's his position in the later paper. Rather, he says perception simply discloses for our awareness some part of the world as apt to be so classified, but also apt to be classified in very many different ways, because this is supposed to be consistent with the point that perceptions really just affords very many contents, is consistent with attributions of many contents, but doesn't really per se involves any particular content. So if this is true, perception is presenting or disclosing something in the world, but doesn't yet contain any particular claim-like thing that could serve as one of the reasons for judgment that X is F, as such, per se. So if this is true, perception as such doesn't warrant judgment and doesn't function as an epistemic constraint because it lacks any determinate content. If the episode doesn't have any determinate content, it's hard to see how it could warrant any particular judgment. So Boyle concludes that perception as such, or sensory experience as such, is rather something like a precondition for something of that sort, for something that could really provide some warrant or justification for judgment. That, however, is delivered only upstream in the cognitive system when percepts become conceptually classified via some kind of specific first-order concepts such as red, blue, or something like that. So this is not my position, it's a position which we basically Boyle develops in a later paper. So my point is that if this is true, it seems to go against the original argument, because right now it's argued by the same author that perception as such, or sensory experience as such, doesn't involve any kind of claim which could serve as a justification or warrant for our empirical judgments. So it's hard to see how this, how this conception, or in other words, this conception is something which is also open for some kind of additive theories to accept. So it's possible to have a different strategy, basically derived from what Boyle himself says in a later paper. But then he makes some interesting further move, which is supposed to be Kantian, and it's supposed somehow to rescue or not to be inconsistent with transformative theory of rationality. So following his interpretation of Kant, Boyle suggests that even if perception as such doesn't really involve any concepts, it involves some kind of general or second order or very abstract categories of objectuality which already shape sensory consciousness. And he says, owing to the influence of such Kantian categories like substance, accidents, or something like that, cause, we perceptually focus either on object, on or their aspect. But still, this is supposed to be consistent with the claim that percepts as such do not have any particular content or representational content. Just somehow these Kantian categories are operative already in the exercises of sensory experience, and the effect is that they somehow focus on particular aspects or on the substance or something like that. So they structure experience, but they do not, that doesn't mean that the experience therefore has some particular conceptual content which would have to be delivered by some kind of first order concept such as red, blue, and so on. So that means that spontaneity or understanding is at work in our sensory consciousness via categories. In this sense, Kant can claim and Boyle can claim that our sensory intuitions are not blind. They are already somehow focused. But still, our perception lack representational content, and hence they don't justify anything. So this is maybe interesting in its own right. I don't know. Maybe you might find it appealing that there is some kind of, spontaneity already involved in sensory experience. But I wonder how this can really, challenge any additive theories of rationality, because this is obviously compatible with some kind of additive theories of rationality, because it still allows that perception lack representational content, hence can't justify anything as such. So how can this help? It seems to me that it is not really anything which should compel additive theories to be worried, because experience as such is not an epistemic constraint. It can become an epistemic constraint, but only upstream in the process when it becomes conceptualized. Moreover, this move seems to be consistent with additive theories of sorts. So, for instance, something close to Kantian abstract categories, very general concepts or second-order concepts, may well structure the way we experience the world around us. If you know something about recent advances in cognitive science, there is a very successful research program on so-called core cognitive systems for objectuality, spatial layout, causality, developed by Elizabeth Spelke and others. And they claim basically that experience is already structured by some kind of very general second-order concepts of object, permanence, causality, and such like. Okay? But the problem is that such core cognitive systems are supposed to be early emerging, for instance, already in the first year in infants, and also species general. So not just we are supposed to have such structures in our minds, but also primates and other animal species are supposed to have such structures in their minds, which structure somehow focus their experience on objects and so on and so on. So they can hardly, these core cognitive systems, it seems to be some kind of empirical analogy to Kantian categories, they can hardly distinguish rational animals, mature human agents, from non-rational animals, non-human animals, or pre-rational animals, such as infants. Okay, so that's so the second, basically the second defense strategy I would like to suggest is suggested by Boyle himself, and it's available to additive theories. And even this Kantian move can be sort of accommodated by additive theories, but the problem is that the way it can be accommodated doesn't really draw any distinction between non-rational and rational animals. So that's this answer. So let's turn to or return to the unity problem. So why is this supposed to be a problem? I wonder. And maybe you will have some, maybe you will explain to me why it should be worried and why it should worry additive theories, but I don't see this. Maybe because I don't understand that quite well. But the problem is that it's not very well clarified in the paper of Boyle. So it's not clear what a unified subjective point of view or this unified I is supposed to be in the first place. It's at least not clear to me. So for instance, I say both I am thinking and I'm sweeting. It seems to me that these two things, thinking and sweeting, are plausibly products of different cognitive or biological systems or mechanisms in me, though I attribute both of them to me. So by analogy, we should wonder why shouldn't my perceptions or desires and my judgments be products of different cognitive systems or mechanisms, though I self-attribute both of them to me? So because the original argument was that we tend to attribute both perceptions and judgments to ourselves, and this was supposed to somehow entail that there is some kind of unified subjective evolving point of view, some kind of self-conscious rationality to which both belong, not two eyes, not two systems or something like that. And I do not see how this follows. So I have this kind of analogy, maybe it's a good one, maybe wrong one, but at least there is this analogy that we often self-attribute various things to ourselves, which seems to be product of different systems. And what follows from that? Certainly not anything as strong as some kind of, thing which Boyle claims to follow from this. So also the second thing, and maybe even more important thing, is that this picture of unified subjective point of view glosses over important differences in those things which we self-attribute to ourselves. So obviously it seems to me some things, including perceptions and also some desires or drives, are just something we tend to think happens to us, not really being under our control. So some drives are not really under our control, though we may distance ourselves from them. We may fail to assent to our perceptions. We may inhibit some desires of ourselves and so on. By contrast, some other things that we do, in particular our judgments, seem to be something under our control, something like our intentional activities, and we just can't in this way distance from them. Okay, so I can't distance from my judgments in the way I can distance from my perception. I can be confronted with an illusion, perceptual illusion, and I might say, okay, but I fail to assent it because it's illusion. But I can't distance myself from my judgment in this way, for instance. And the same seems to hold for some desires. I can desire something. I might have some sexual desire, maybe very powerful. I might distance from it, but I can't do that with my judgment. So it seems to me that there is really some data which seems to point to something which might even suggest, well, in some sense, there are two eyes. Maybe there is not unified, rational, evolving I or something like that. That would seem to be something consistent with many psychological theories, which obviously Boyle wants to displace. But it's not clear to me that they can be displaced easily in this way. So it seems to me if this kind of critique is on the right track, it seems to me that we just can't, draw a sharp difference between, or we just can't argue that all our desires, all our perceptions are rational just because we self-attribute them to ourselves in the same breath that we self-attribute to ourselves our judgments. Okay, so where do we go from here? So that's the second critique. So if we conclude with me that Boyle's critique is really inconclusive or something more has to be said in order to make it conclusive, does it mean that we have reason to accept additive theories and reject transformative theories? Well, not really, because I'm not committed myself to anything which is defined by Boyle as additive theory. It's his own definition of something. So, and I just wanted to show that his own arguments against these positions are really not very convincing, and people who might be attracted to them can respond to them in some ways. But still, there may be better arguments in favor of one or the other view. Okay, so I just responded to two arguments, and my own view is that they are not really satisfying. But there may be better arguments against additive theories and better arguments in favor of transformative theories. I do not say anything about that. But it seems to me that there may also be arguments or evidence, including scientific evidence, that may warrant something else in between these two positions as they are defined by Boyle. So to elaborate, something may well be shared or conserved, some perceptual mechanism or basic drives in both human animals and non-human animals. That seems perfectly possible, according to me. But also it's possible that something may well be transformed to some extent due, for instance, to some new quality or functionality which evolved, such as language and so on, and which plausibly transforms some of our operations, but it might not transform all of our operations across the board. So there is something, we have two extreme positions defined like this by Boyle. And Boyle rhetoric says either this one or that one, nothing in between. Okay, so additive theories as they are defined by Boyle simply are supposed to claim all perceptions, desires, feelings, etc. are always of basically the same kind or at least have the same basis in humans and animals. Okay, there is no difference. All the time they are of the same kind. Seems to be kind of extreme view, to me at least. But also transformative theory seems to be another extreme. It claims all perceptions, desires, etc. are always transformed, hence different in kind in humans. Okay, and the question is it really plausible to assume either this or that? Maybe, the whole debate as it is framed by Boyle is wrongly framed. Okay, maybe we do not face this kind of dilemma. Maybe there is something in between which is more plausible. And this is basically what I would like to argue. I'm inclined to think that there is a via media. Okay, so something in between seems possible and indeed plausible. So for instance, some generic animal mental capacities such as color or shape perception may really be basically the same or intact. And scientific research seems to inform us that this is really the case, that there are not really any significant difference between the way we perceive color and chimpanzees perceive color, though there might be some cultural differences or cultural influences on color perception or shape perception, edge something, and probably more, okay, of this kind. But it doesn't mean that all such capacities broadly defined always function or are manifested in the same way in humans and animals. For instance, our desires and beliefs may well be different simply because they are integrated and play a certain functional role in a larger economy which comprises also linguistic, conceptual, and reflective critical powers. That's certainly something which is plausible. Not all of our beliefs may be of an animal kind because simply they are integrated in a system which already involves some other capacity. But this is really consistent with some kind of additive theories. Once human animals have such powers, conceptual powers, linguistic powers, reflective powers, this truly changes its mental operation. But still, some desires or drives, such as sexual desires or drives, are not easily viewed as kind of rational, even if we accept this picture. Okay, so we might have some similarities between humans and animals on the perceptual level, for instance. We may have some differences at the level of desires or beliefs, but even at the level of desires, I would submit, it's not that clear that all our desires in particular are of a rational kind. Okay, this is also something which I insinuated in my critique of the so-called unity problem. So let me conclude. So we might ask, by way of conclusion, so is this not enough to talk of transformations or kinds of mind? So for instance, if there is some kind of system which involves something like linguistic, conceptual powers and reflective powers, which seem to somehow affect also our desires, beliefs, and so on, Is it not enough to talk of transformation, even if the transformation doesn't go all the way down to affect all our perceptual capacity, all our desires, etc.? And it seems to me that scientific theory, that to answer this question, that what is transformed and how extensively, is really something which scientists should address rather than philosophical a priori arguments. So I would expect scientific theorizing rather than a priori arguments such as unity problem and interaction problem to tell us something informative about how such things evolve or develop, how they are organized in humans and other animals, how they work and how they interact and how pervasively they interact. So for instance, I would expect scientific research to tell us something about how much or deeply language or concepts penetrate human perception. And hence, what kind of transformation and how pervasive language or concepts afford. So thank you for attention.